The night howled. Outside, a late-season nor'easter tore through the city, rattling the windows of St. Jude's Community Hospital. Inside, the ER pulsed with a desperate, frantic energy, a microcosm of chaos against the storm's relentless rhythm. Alara Ellie Vance, RN, moved through it all with the practiced grace of a dancer in a mosh pit. Her movements were precise, her voice a calm counterpoint to the wail of sirens and the distressed cries of patients. In her late 20s, with intelligent, weary eyes and a perpetually messy bun of auburn hair, Ellie was the eye of the storm, a steadfast anchor in the swirling currents of pain and urgency. She believed in doing the right thing, no matter the protocol, a conviction that often put her at odds with the labyrinthine rules of institutional medicine. Tonight, the ER was a war zone. A multi-car pileup on the rain-slicked interstate, compounded by falling debris from the storm, had unleashed a deluge of trauma. Gurneys lined the hallways, every bay was occupied, and the air thrummed with the high-pitched urgency of monitors, the clatter of instruments, and the terse commands of doctors. Ellie, dripping sweat despite the ward's chill, had just stabilized a pedestrian with a broken femur when the next trauma alert blared. Incoming. Male, early 20s, GCS 6, massive internal bleeding, ETA, 2 minutes. The voice of the paramedics crackled over the intercom, punctuated by static. A gurney burst through the double doors, pushed by 2 grim-faced EMTs. On it lay a young man, unnaturally pale, his crisp white dress shirt, or what was left of it, stained a horrifying crimson. His face, visible beneath the oxygen mask, was contorted in pain, but his jaw was strong, etched with the faint lines of discipline. Ellie's eyes immediately went to his uniform trousers, which were distinctly military, despite being soaked and torn. A subtle insignia on his belt buckle, barely visible, caught her attention. West Point. John Hamilton, one EMT gasped, trying to keep pace as they wheeled him into Trauma Bay 3. Rolled multiple times, heavy blunt force trauma to the abdomen, BP dropping fast. Dr. Ramirez, the on-duty attending physician, a harried man with stress lines permanently etched into his forehead, barked orders. Get a central line in. Type and cross. Stat. Ellie was already there, a blur of motion. She deftly prepared the central line kit, her hands moving with an almost surgical precision as she anticipated Ramirez's next command. His pressure's 70/40, doctor, she reported, her voice steady. Heart rate 130 and thready. He's bleeding out internally, Ramirez muttered, his brow furrowed with grim concentration. We need blood now. How long on the type and cross? A junior nurse rushed over, her face paling. Blood bank just called, Dr. Ramirez. He's AB negative. They have 0 units. And the statewide registry shows no immediate matches available for emergency transport. A collective gasp went through the bay. AB negative was one of the rarest blood types. 0 units. It was a death sentence. Ellie felt a cold, dread claw at her stomach. She glanced at the monitor. The cadet's heart rate was climbing, his oxygen saturation plummeting. His lips were turning blue. He was fading. Fast. Ramirez slammed a fist on the counter. Damn it! Call every hospital in a 100-mile radius? We don't have time for this. But they both knew it was futile. Minutes, precious, irretrievable minutes, were slipping away. Every second, the cadet's life force drained away, a crimson tide ebbing. Ellie's mind raced, a whirlwind of medical knowledge and ethical dilemmas. AB negative. Her own blood type. She'd donated often, knew her specific antigen profile down to the letter. It was a rare match. Hospital protocol was ironclad. No direct staff, to patient transfusions. Too many risks, too many liability issues, the blood not properly screened through the blood bank's rigorous, multi-day process. It was unprofessional, dangerous, and strictly forbidden. But looking at John Hamilton, barely clinging to life, his strong young face going slack, Ellie saw not a patient, not a liability, but a human being, a son, a future soldier, dying. The hospital's blood bank was a fortress of rules, but sometimes a fortress could starve the very people it was meant to protect. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Dr. Ramirez, she said, her voice cutting through the rising panic in the bay. I'm AB negative. My blood type matches his exactly, rare antigens and all. I know it. Ramirez's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and desperate hope. Ellie, you know protocol. We can't. He's going to die, doctor. Ellie cut him off, her voice cracking with urgency. We have no time. Give me an order. I'll take full responsibility. I'll sign whatever I need to. But we can't let him die if there's an option. She looked at him, her gaze unwavering, pleading with him to see beyond the rules, to see the life at stake. Ramirez hesitated, his eyes flicking between the crashing cadet and Ellie's determined face. The Hippocratic oath warred with institutional fear. For a fleeting second, he looked terrified of the consequences. Then, he looked at the monitors, saw the flatlining trajectory, and the fear in his eyes gave way to a desperate resolve. Damn the protocol, Ramirez rasped, making a decision that could end his career. Ellie, get a colleague to draw you. Rapid cross-match on the side. I'll get the consent forms ready. Move. Ellie didn't wait. She grabbed a colleague, a seasoned ER nurse named Mark, whose face was a mask of shock but who immediately understood. Mark, grab a unit of O-neg. Start the drip. Get a line in me, big bore, 16 gauge. We're going direct. Mark, his face pale, moved with grim efficiency. Within minutes, Ellie was hooked up, the large needle, a dull throb in her arm. Her blood, warm and life-giving, flowed through the IV tubing, a direct lifeline from her to the cadet. It was a desperate, unheard-of measure, a medical Hail Mary. The rapid cross-match showed compatibility, confirming her words. The change was almost instantaneous. As her blood entered his veins, the cadet's blood pressure began to stabilize, inching up from the brink. His heart rate, though still fast, grew stronger, less thready. The blue tinge receded from his lips, replaced by a faint, healthier pink. A collective sigh of relief, audible above the storm, filled the trauma bay. Ellie, lightheaded but resolute, watched him, her hand still resting on the IV pole. She had done it. Against all odds, against every rule in the book, she had pulled him back from the precipice. Exhaustion washed over her, a wave of profound relief and bone-deep fatigue. The cadet was alive. For now, that was all that mattered. The next morning, the city was still reeling from the storm, but the sun had broken through, casting a watery light over the urban landscape. Ellie woke up to the insistent chirping of her alarm, her body stiff and sore, a dull ache in her left arm where the needle had been. Despite the physical discomfort, a quiet sense of satisfaction settled over her. John Hamilton was stable, his vitals holding. She'd checked the hospital's internal system before leaving, a quick, furtive glance at his chart. He was still in critical condition, but he was alive, and that was a victory. The miracle nurse, as some of her colleagues were whispering, was now a small legend within the ER. A few sympathetic pats on the back, a murmured, "Good job," from Dr. Ramirez, who looked even more tired than usual but also strangely relieved. Ellie had just brewed her first cup of coffee when her phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number. "Hello? Is this Alara Vance?" A woman's voice, thick with emotion, asked. "Yes, it Island. This is Catherine Hamilton, John's mother." Her voice broke. I just wanted to thank you. They told us what you did. You saved our son. We're indebted to you, truly. We'll never forget it." The gratitude was raw, genuine, and Ellie felt a warmth spread through her chest, a small reward for a night of immense stress and rule-breaking. "He's a strong young man, Mrs. Hamilton," Ellie replied softly. "He fought hard. I just helped him get a fighting chance. Still, you went above and beyond. We'll be in touch." The line clicked, leaving Ellie with a sense of closure and a faint, hopeful feeling. Maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't come back to bite her. She had just settled onto her worn couch, nursing her coffee and trying to catch up on some news, when a subtle rumble vibrated through her old apartment building. She glanced out her window. An immaculate, obsidian black government SUV, tinted windows reflecting the morning sun, pulled up to the curb. It was an anomaly in her working-class neighborhood, a sleek predator among the aging sedans and minivans. Her heart gave a nervous flutter. "Please, not for me." The passenger door opened, and a figure emerged. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a full-dress uniform, crisp and dark. Gold braid gleamed on his shoulders, rows of colorful ribbons adorned his chest, and his posture was ramrod straight, radiating an aura of unwavering authority. He moved with a stiff, almost intimidating grace. There was no doubt who he was. A general. Ellie felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. A cold knot formed in her stomach. "This isn't about gratitude." The doorbell chimed, a polite but insistent sound. Ellie took a deep breath, steeling herself. She smoothed down her worn sweatpants, subconsciously checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. She looked disheveled, a stark contrast to the man on her doorstep. She opened the door. The general stood there, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in her rumpled appearance and the small, slightly cluttered apartment visible behind her. His face was chiseled, older than she'd initially thought, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He carried himself with the weight of immense power and an almost unsettling stillness. Nurse Alara Vance? His voice was deep, resonant, and devoid of any warmth. It was not a question, but a statement of fact. Yes, Ellie managed, her voice a little shaky. Major General Marcus Thorne, United States Army. He offered no hand to shake. His eyes were like chips of ice. May I come in? It wasn't a request, but a command. Ellie stepped back, feeling a strange mixture of fear and defiance. The general entered, filling her small living room with his imposing presence. He didn't sit, but stood stiffly, his gaze sweeping over her framed nursing degree, a stack of medical journals, and a small worn photo of her and her parents. I understand you performed an emergency blood transfusion on Cadet John Hamilton last night. His voice was flat, uninflected. Yes, General. The hospital's blood bank was depleted of his rare blood type, and he was crashing. There was no time to wait. Ellie explained, her voice gaining a little strength as she recounted the desperate situation. She expected commendation, perhaps a reprimand for breaking protocol, but nothing like the cold fury radiating from him. You understand, General Thorne continued, ignoring her explanation, that you administered your own, unscreened, undocumented blood directly to a patient. It was emergency screened for immediate compatibility, General, and I did it to save his life. He would have died. Saving a life? Thorne retorted, his voice still low but now laced with a steely edge. Is not always the primary objective, Nurse Vance. Sometimes, protecting a mission island? Ellie frowned, confusion warring with burgeoning anger. A mission? What are you talking about? General Thorne took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. Cadet John Hamilton is not merely a West Point student. He is part of a highly classified Department of Defense program, codenamed Project Nightingale, a program dealing with advanced biological research and genetic markers relevant to national security. Ellie felt a jolt. Genetic markers? What does that have to do with? It has everything to do with it, Thorne cut her off, his voice rising, a controlled thunder. Nurse Vance, your blood contains an extremely rare and unique genetic marker. A marker we, the Department of Defense, have been tracking in a handful of individuals for years. A marker that makes you, unbeknownst to you, a person of extraordinary biological interest to the United States government. The words hung in the air, chilling Ellie to the bone. Extraordinary biological interest? It sounded less like a compliment and more like a threat. My blood? She whispered, her mind racing, trying to make sense of the sudden, terrifying shift in reality. What about my blood? Your undocumented, unscreened blood donation, Thorne explained, each word a hammer blow, has now entered a secure government asset. You have, through your reckless, unauthorized actions, created a biological contamination of a top-secret program. You have exposed a closely guarded genetic signature to a civilian, and you have, most critically, jeopardized a multi-billion-dollar national security initiative. Ellie stared at him aghast. I saved his life. He was dying. Her voice was barely a whisper. The general was furious, not for the life saved, but for the protocol broken and the secret exposed. The gratitude of Mrs. Hamilton felt like a distant, irrelevant dream. And in doing so, Thorne concluded, his voice dropping back to its cold, measured tone, you have entangled yourself and the Department of Defense in a far more complex and dangerous situation than you can possibly comprehend. Your heroism, Nurse Vance, has made you a liability, and liabilities, in my line of work, are dealt with. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing down on Ellie. The sun outside, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a spotlight on her rapidly unraveling world. The knock on the door hadn't been about thanks. It had been about control, about a terrifying, unforeseen consequence, and about a general who viewed life and death through the cold, calculating lens of national security. The general's words echoed in Ellie's mind long after his black SUV had silently glided away. A liability. The phrase hung in the air, cold and menacing. She tried to make sense of it, but her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Genetic markers? A top-secret program? It sounded like something out of a spy thriller, not her mundane life as an ER nurse. Her phone rang, jarring her. It was an internal hospital number. "Nurse Vance, Dr. Albright wants to see you in his office." Immediately. The tone was sharp, devoid of the usual pleasantries. Dr. Albright, the hospital administrator. A man whose natural habitat was behind a desk, surrounded by spreadsheets and policy manuals, far removed from the blood and grit of the ER. He was a spineless bureaucrat, obsessed with liability, budgets, and public image. Ellie knew this meeting wouldn't be pleasant, but she wasn't prepared for the sheer venom in his eyes. She found him in his impeccably tidy office, flanked by Mr. Henderson, the hospital's lead legal counsel, a man whose face was perpetually creased with worry lines. Albright's usually smooth forehead was mottled red, and his hands trembled slightly as he gestured for her to sit in a stiff, uncomfortable chair. "Nurse Vance," Albright began, his voice a low, furious hiss. "Do you have any idea the gravity of what you have done?" Ellie straightened her shoulders, refusing to cower. "I saved a patient's life, Dr. Albright. Cadet Hamilton would have died without that transfusion. There were no other options." "Options?" Albright practically shrieked, slamming a fist on his desk. "Options, Nurse Vance, do not include abrogating every single safety protocol and policy this hospital has in place. You performed a direct staff-to-patient transfusion without proper screening, without physician authorization at the time of procedure, and without regard for the immense liability you have now exposed this institution to." Ellie tried to interrupt, to explain Dr. Ramirez's desperation, his eventual consent, but Albright cut her off with a furious wave of his hand. "Don't you dare!" "I just received a call, Nurse Vance. From the Pentagon. The actual Pentagon? Do you know what kind of legal and reputational quagmire you have just plunged Street Judes into?" Mr. Henderson, the lawyer, cleared his throat nervously. "Nurse Vance, while we appreciate your intent, the legal ramifications are severe. This isn't just a hospital policy violation. This involves national security implications, as the general explicitly stated." "National security? Because I gave blood?" Ellie scoffed, her anger finally bubbling over. "This is absurd. I am a nurse, not a spy. I did my job." "Your job, Nurse Vance, is to follow procedure," Albright roared, his face purpling. "Your heroic act, as you so grandly deem it, is a reckless, career-ending mistake. Effective immediately, you are suspended without pay, pending a full internal investigation. Your access to the hospital is revoked. You are not to speak to any staff or media. Consider yourself lucky we're not pressing criminal charges ourselves for insubordination and endangering a patient." Rage bait, the gutless bureaucrat punishing a hero to save himself. Ellie stared at him, speechless. Her heroic act, her selfless choice, was being twisted into a reckless, career-ending mistake. She tried to defend herself, to explain the life-or-death scenario, but Albright refused to listen, his eyes fixed on the distant threat of institutional liability, oblivious to the human cost. He was a spineless creature, sacrificing a dedicated nurse to placate a powerful military general. The injustice burned a hole in her stomach. Ellie walked out of the hospital in a daze, the suspension notice clutched in her hand. The familiar building, once a sanctuary of healing, now felt like a hostile fortress. She was adrift, her professional life suddenly ripped away. She made her way home, the anger and confusion churning inside her. She needed time to process, to call Ben, her friend and lawyer. But before she could even unlock her apartment door, her phone vibrated with a news alert. West Point Cadet's parents express concern over nurse's unsanctioned medical intervention. Ellie's blood ran cold. She clicked the link, her fingers trembling. The article, released by a national wire service, quoted a PR representative for the Hamilton family. "Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton are deeply grateful for the efforts of all medical personnel involved in their son's critical care. However, they are understandably concerned about the unsanctioned medical intervention involving a non-vetted biological donation to their son. They are currently exploring their legal options to ensure Cadet Hamilton's long-term health and privacy are protected, and to ascertain the motives behind such an unusual and potentially risky procedure." Rage bait, the ultimate betrayal from the very people she helped. The words hit her like a physical blow. Unsanctioned, non-vetted, potentially risky. Ascertain the motives. It was a complete reversal. The tearful gratitude from Mrs. Hamilton had vanished, replaced by cold, calculated suspicion. They were throwing her under the bus, distancing themselves to protect their son's career and their family name. General Thorne must have visited them, spun his own narrative, and scared them into abandoning her. The very people she had saved, the family whose son she had pulled from the jaws of death, were now publicly attacking her. The betrayal was profound, a bitter, poisonous taste in her mouth. She had expected ingratitude from the military, even from her hospital, but not from the Hamiltons. Not after she had literally given a piece of herself to save their son. The next morning brought no respite. Instead, it brought a heavy, insistent knocking on her apartment door. Ellie peered through the peephole. Two figures in dark blue uniforms stood on her porch. Police officers. She opened the door cautiously. They were polite, but their faces were grim. "Nurse Alara Vance?" the lead officer, a stern-faced woman, asked. "Yes? I'm Officer Miller. This is Officer Davies. We're here to ask some questions regarding an incident at St. Jude's Community Hospital on the night of the 14th. Specifically, the emergency transfusion involving Cadet John Hamilton." Ellie's heart sank. "I've already spoken to the hospital administration about that." "We understand that, ma'am," Officer Miller replied, her voice clipped. "However, this is at the request of a federal agency. We've been asked to ascertain the full details of your involvement." "A federal agency? We're not at liberty to disclose specifics, ma'am, but it's a matter of national security." The phrase again, national security. It was becoming a cudgel, wielded by everyone against her. "I saved his life," Ellie said, her voice strained. "That's the only detail." Officer Davies stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, we need to advise you that you are not to leave the city without notifying us. Your passport may be subject to a temporary hold. This is a standard procedure in cases where federal interests are involved. We may also need to conduct a thorough interview at a later date, potentially involving federal agents." Rage bait, the misuse of local law enforcement to intimidate and isolate. Ellie stared at them, her mouth agape. She wasn't just suspended, attacked by the family. Now she was being treated like a criminal. She was being surveilled, restricted. She was no longer a hero. She was a person of interest, a potential threat. The misuse of local law enforcement to intimidate and isolate her, to prevent her from seeking help or escape, felt like a deliberate, calculated move by the shadowy forces the general represented. "You're restricting my movement?" Ellie asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What crime have I committed?" "No charges have been filed, ma'am," Officer Miller stated, her tone carefully neutral. "This is merely a precautionary measure, pending further investigation. We'll be in touch." They turned and walked away, leaving Ellie standing alone in her doorway, the bitter taste of fear and injustice filling her mouth. The storm outside had cleared, but a new, far more insidious storm was gathering around her, threatening to drown her. The system, once a source of order and protection, had turned against her with a terrifying, bureaucratic ruthlessness. Every authority figure she had once respected now seemed intent on crushing her for doing what was right. The days that followed blurred into a monotonous, suffocating haze of isolation. Ellie's phone, once a lifeline to friends and colleagues, now rang infrequently, mostly with telemarketers or the occasional hesitant call from her mother, whom she tried to reassure with carefully curated half-truths. Her colleagues, following Dr. Albright's strict orders, actively avoided her. A text message to Mark, the nurse who had helped her, went unanswered for days, finally returning a terse, apologetic reply. "Ellie, I can't. My job. I have kids." The message, though understandable, twisted the knife deeper. She was radioactive, her good name tarnished, her professional life evaporated. She tried to visit the hospital, just to get some paperwork, but her key card was deactivated. A security guard, a man she'd shared countless pleasantries with over the years, politely but firmly told her she was no longer authorized to enter. She was locked out, both literally and figuratively, from the world she had dedicated her life to. The local news, fueled by the Hamiltons' initial statement and the hospital's terse, lawyer-vetted press release, painted her as a rogue, dangerous nurse. Unpredictable, unprofessional, a liability. These were the words used to describe her. There were even thinly veiled accusations of mental instability, whispers that she might have sought attention. The narrative was clear. She was not a hero, but a cautionary tale, a reckless individual who had jeopardized patient safety and institutional integrity. Her picture, a grainy ID photo, flashed across screens, transforming her from a compassionate caregiver into a public pariah. She spent her days confined to her small apartment, the walls seeming to close in around her. The once comforting silence was now oppressive, filled with the echo of General Thorne's cold pronouncements and Dr. Albright's furious accusations, her savings, never substantial, dwindled rapidly without a paycheck. The future stretched before her, a bleak, empty expanse. Then, one rainy afternoon, the knock on her door returned. This time, it was General Thorne again. He stood there, as imposing and immaculate as before, but his demeanor was subtly different. The raw fury from their first encounter had been replaced by a chillingly pragmatic calm. He held a thick manila folder under his arm. "Nurse Vance," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation, his eyes scanning her apartment, taking in the empty coffee cup, the discarded food wrappers, the visible signs of her despair. "I believe you've had some time to reflect." Ellie wrapped her arms around herself, trying to project defiance she didn't feel. "Reflect on what, General? On how an act of pure compassion gets you thrown to the wolves?" Thorne ignored the sarcasm. He pulled a chair to her small kitchen table and opened the folder. Inside were several intimidating-looking documents. "Nurse Vance, I am here to offer you a choice. A final choice, before this situation escalates beyond your control." Ellie's heart pounded against her ribs. "What choice?" "Option 1, Thorne stated, his voice flat and unemotional. "You sign these documents." He pushed a thick stack of papers across the table. "An extensive non-disclosure agreement, specifically pertaining to Project Nightingale and any knowledge, however tangential, you may have gleaned from your incident. You will also submit to a lifetime of medical monitoring by a specified military health facility. And," he added, his eyes meeting hers, "you will quietly disappear. Your nursing license will be revoked by the state, citing a voluntary surrender due to medical incapacitation. We can find a new position for you, perhaps in a remote military research facility, far from prying eyes. A quiet life, with a steady income, but no contact with your past." Ellie stared at the papers, then at his impassive face. "Disappear? Give up my life, my identity, my career, everything I worked for? Or," Thorne continued, ignoring her distress, "Option 2, you refuse. In which case, Nurse Vance, you will face federal charges for interfering with a national security operation, obstruction of justice, and potentially even corporate espionage if we decide to delve into your motives more deeply. Given the severity of the charges and the evidence we possess regarding your unauthorized actions, I can assure you the outcome will not be favorable. You will serve time, a significant amount of time, and when you emerge, your life will truly be over, in every sense of the word." He leaned back, watching her, his eyes unblinking. "You have 48 hours to decide. Choose wisely, Nurse Vance. Your future, or what's left of it, depends on it." He stood, gathering his papers with a crisp precision, leaving the non-disclosure agreement on the table like a poisonous offer. Then, he was gone, the heavy thud of her front door closing echoing through the silence. Rock bottom. Ellie felt it, the cold, hard, inescapable surface. Her career was destroyed, her reputation in tatters, and now she faced a choice between becoming a ghost or a prisoner. The full, crushing weight of the U.S. government, a faceless, implacable behemoth, bore down on her. She walked to the wall where her nursing license hung, framed with pride. The paper, once a symbol of her dedication and skill, now mocked her. She had taken an oath to do no harm, but in doing so, she had apparently harmed herself beyond repair. She felt like a complete failure, utterly alone, utterly defeated. Tears, hot and bitter, finally welled in her eyes, blurring the edges of her world, a world that was rapidly shrinking to nothing. The 48-hour deadline loomed like a death sentence. Ellie spent the next day and a half in a state of numb despair, the non-disclosure agreement lying on her kitchen table like a venomous snake. Every option felt like a surrender, a betrayal of everything she believed in. How could she disappear, deny her identity, live under constant surveillance, all because she saved a life? And how could she face federal prison, an accusation that would forever brand her as a criminal? Just as the last vestiges of hope threatened to extinguish, a flicker ignited within her. It was a small, stubborn spark, born of indignation and a refusal to be utterly consumed. She remembered her oath, her passion, her belief in justice. She wasn't a criminal, she wasn't unstable, she was a good nurse who had done the right thing, and she wouldn't let them erase her. With a surge of newfound resolve, she Googled pro bono legal aid. Her finger, trembling slightly, landed on the website for Justice for All, a small, community-based legal clinic, specializing in cases against large institutions. It felt like a long shot, a last, desperate act. She arrived at the clinic the next morning, exhausted but determined. The waiting room was small and bustling, filled with people seeking help for various grievances. After an hour, a young man, barely older than her, with a shock of unruly brown hair and an earnest, slightly rumpled suit, called her name. "Ellie Vance? I'm Ben Carter. Come on in." Ben's office was even smaller, overflowing with legal texts and stacks of files. He offered her a weak coffee and settled into his worn chair, his gaze open and genuinely curious. "So, Miss Vance, tell me your story." Ellie took a deep breath and started from the beginning. The chaotic ER, the dying cadet, the depleted blood bank, her desperate choice, the immediate stabilization. She then recounted General Thorne's terrifying visit, Dr. Albright's furious suspension, the Hamiltons' public betrayal, the police visit, and finally, Thorne's chilling ultimatum. She spoke without embellishment, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Ben listened, not interrupting, his expression shifting from concern to disbelief, then to a quiet, simmering anger. When she finished, the room was silent except for the distant city hum. "Let me get this straight," Ben said finally. "You saved a kid's life, a West Point cadet, by giving him your own blood when no other options existed. And for that, the hospital fired you, the family you saved publicly disavowed you, the local police put you under unofficial house arrest, and a major general from the Pentagon is threatening you with federal prison if you don't disappear into a classified military project?" "That's about the size of it," Ellie confirmed, feeling a strange sense of relief just saying it all out loud to someone who actually seemed to believe her. Ben leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them, and Ellie saw it, a righteous indignation burning in their depths. "This is beyond rage bait, Ellie. This is a monumental injustice. They're trying to crush you, to silence you, all because you disrupted their little secret. Well, I don't care how many stars he has, General Thorne is not going to get away with this." Ellie felt a glimmer of hope, a warmth spreading through her chest she hadn't felt in days. "You'll help me? Pro bono?" "Absolutely," Ben declared, his jaw set. "This is precisely why I became a lawyer, to fight for the little guy against powerful, abusive institutions." "But," he cautioned, his expression turning serious, "we cannot fight the U.S. military on grounds of national security. That's a black hole we'll never win against. The secret project is their impenetrable fortress. We won't even acknowledge it. Our only weapon is public opinion. We must reframe this narrative. From nurse breaks rules endangers secret project to government punishes hero nurse for saving a soldier's life." Ellie nodded, understanding. "How do we do that?" "We tell the real story," Ben said, his eyes alight with strategy. "We need to hit them where it hurts. Their public image, their moral authority." Ellie remembered something. "Before Dr. Albright revoked my access, I managed to pull up John Hamilton's initial ER charts. The vitals, the critical state he was in, and my own blood test results, confirming my rare blood type and compatibility." Ben's eyes widened. "That's gold, Ellie. Undeniable evidence of his condition and your match. Now, do you have any colleagues, any doctors who were there that night, who might be willing to speak anonymously?" Ellie thought of Dr. Ramirez, the fear in his eyes, but also the desperate hope when she offered her blood. "Maybe. Ramirez was the attending physician. He gave the order, reluctantly, but he gave it. He might be too scared to go on record, but he knows the truth." "Perfect," Ben grinned. "Anonymity is key for them. Now, we need to get this to the right person. Not local news. They're too easily swayed by the official line. We need someone with national reach, someone who isn't afraid to go after big institutions. I know just the guy. An old-school investigative journalist, relentless, fearless. He owes me a favor." Over the next 24 hours, Ben and Ellie worked tirelessly. Ellie poured out every detail, every emotion. Ben meticulously reviewed the hospital charts, cross-referencing times, dosages, and vital signs. He crafted a compelling narrative, focusing solely on the human element, the life, timeline, the lack of available blood, the doctor's desperate hesitation, and Ellie's selfless choice to intervene. They pointedly omitted any mention of Project Nightingale or genetic markers, making the government's and the hospital's disproportionate reaction seem utterly malicious and indefensible. They included a screenshot of the cadet's flatlining vitals, a stark visual of the brink he was on. They secured an anonymous quote from an ER doctor present that night, subtly implying, "Dr. Ramirez," without naming him. We were out of options. Nurse Vance acted with courage and skill. Without her intervention, Cadet Hamilton would not have survived the night. To punish her for saving a life? It's unconscionable. Ben sent the meticulously prepared dossier to his journalist contact, a man named Robert Jenkins, known for his tenacious reporting and ability to shake mountains. The 48-hour deadline came and went. Ellie received no further contact from General Thorne. The silence was deafening, terrifying. She wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Then, just as the morning sun began to creep over the horizon, Ellie's phone buzzed with an alert. Not from the hospital, not from the police, but from a major national news outlet. Ben's name flashed on her screen immediately. Ellie clicked the link, her heart hammering against her ribs. The headline, stark and powerful, screamed at her from the screen. Hero nurse who saved West Point Cadet's life suspended, faces federal investigation. Beneath it was her ID photo, no longer grainy and incriminating, but now imbued with a new, defiant strength. The article laid out the entire story, piece by painstaking piece, a damning indictment of the hospital, the Hamiltons, and the shadowy government forces. The screenshot of John Hamilton's crashing vitals was prominently displayed, a visceral testament to Ellie's quick thinking. A small, quiet sob escaped Ellie's lips, but this time, it wasn't from despair. It was from a profound, overwhelming surge of vindication. The truth, finally, was out. The spark of defiance had ignited a firestorm. The article was a bombshell. It wasn't just reported, it exploded. The internet caught fire. Stand With Ellie trended globally within hours, eclipsing every other news story. Social media feeds were deluged with outrage. How could they punish a hero? What kind of system does this? Shame on Street Judes. Nursing unions across the country issued scathing statements condemning the hospital's actions and pledging support for Ellie. Veterans groups, furious that a system designed to protect soldiers was being used to persecute a civilian who saved one, called for official inquiries and protests. Even politicians, sensing the groundswell of public anger, began to weigh in, demanding explanations from the Pentagon and the hospital. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelmingly in Ellie's favor. The narrative, carefully crafted by Ben, resonated deeply with an audience fed up with bureaucratic inefficiency and institutional callousness. The rage bait had worked. People were furious, and their fury was directed squarely at her antagonists. The Hamiltons, once lauded for their son's military career, were savaged online for their betrayal. Their social media accounts were flooded with angry comments, their family business boycotted. Dr. Albright, already on thin ice with his staff, faced an internal revolt. Nurses threatened a mass walkout if Ellie wasn't immediately reinstated. Calls for his resignation flooded the hospital board's phone lines. General Thorne and the Pentagon, caught completely off guard, were suddenly on the defensive. They issued a terse statement acknowledging an ongoing review of protocols regarding civilian medical interventions, but it only poured fuel on the fire. They couldn't explain their heavy-handed actions without revealing the top-secret Project Nightingale, and that was an absolute non-starter. They were caught in a PR nightmare of their own making, a military juggernaut humbled by a single, determined nurse and a tenacious lawyer. The reckoning was swift and decisive. First, the hospital board convened an emergency session. Under immense public and internal pressure, they unanimously voted to immediately reinstate Ellie Vance with full back pay, issue a public apology for the misguided disciplinary action, and establish a new Ellie Vance Fund for emergency medical innovations. Dr. Albright was summarily fired, his career as an administrator ending not with a whimper, but with a roar of public condemnation. His last, desperate public statement about unfortunate misunderstandings was met with widespread derision. Next, the Hamiltons, facing ruinous public backlash, released a new, groveling statement. They retracted their previous remarks, praising Nurse Vance as a true hero and announcing a substantial donation to the St. Jude's Community Hospital in Ellie's name, specifically for emergency blood services. Mrs. Hamilton, her voice cracking, personally called Ellie to offer a tearful, genuine apology, admitting they had been pressured and had acted out of fear for their son. Finally, Major General Marcus Thorne appeared at a hastily arranged press conference at the Pentagon. His face was a mask of grim restraint. He gave a clipped, formal statement. The inquiry into the medical incident involving Cadet John Hamilton has been concluded. While protocols were undeniably circumvented, the Department of Defense acknowledges the life-saving outcome. Nurse Alara Vance's unconventional but ultimately effective actions are no longer under review, and we consider this matter closed. There was no apology, no admission of wrongdoing, but the message was clear. They had backed down. Ellie had won. A week later, Ellie walked back into the St. Jude's ER for her first shift back. Her heart was a mix of nerves and exhilaration. The scent of antiseptic and stale coffee, once a symbol of her misery, now felt like coming home. As she pushed through the double doors, the bustling, chaotic rhythm of the ER paused. Her colleagues, the same ones who had avoided her, now turned. Mark, the nurse who had sent the terse text, met her eyes, a silent apology in his gaze. Then, slowly at first, then with a rising crescendo, they began to clap. A standing ovation, right there in the ER, amidst the beeping machines and the quiet suffering. Ellie felt tears well in her eyes, but this time they were tears of triumph. She smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile, and gave a slight bow. Then, she walked over to the nurse's station, logged in, and donned her scrubs. The world outside, with its generals and administrators and PR nightmares, faded. Here, in the ER, was where she belonged. Her first task was to orient a new, terrified junior nurse, fresh out of college, overwhelmed by the organized chaos. Ellie put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's a lot, I know," she said softly. "But you've got this. Just remember why you're here. To help people." The junior nurse nodded, still wide-eyed. Ellie gave her a confident, knowing nod. She had saved a life, been crushed by the system, and fought back not with power, but with the simple, undeniable truth of her actions. Her integrity remained her greatest strength, and in the heart of the ER, it shone brighter than any medal or rank. She was home.